Welcome to the Warrenville Historical Society's 13th Annual Cemetery Walk, Dead Men Talking, and Some Women Too. Although we all wish we were in the candlelit Warrenville Cemetery tonight, honoring Warrenville residents who have gone before us, we are happy to be able to bring this program virtually. Colonel Julius Morton Warren founded the community of Warrenville in 1833 and was elected to the state legislature in 1844. During his time as a legislator, he was one of the sponsors of the Illinois Cemetery Act, which became law in 1845. The Warrenville Cemetery Association was founded March 3, 1845, the second oldest organization in Warrenville, preceded only by what is now called Community Baptist Church, which has been founded in 1834 in the Warren home. The cemetery has been governed by the volunteer board of directors since that time. Before 1845, there was already a burial ground in Warrenville located on the east side of First Street, today's Winfield Road, between what are now called Greenview Avenue and Butterfield Road. Land was purchased from Colonel Warren for a larger cemetery along Big Woods Road, today's Warrenville Road, where we now find ourselves. The graves from the old burial ground were relocated, either to this cemetery, to Naperville Cemetery, or the Big Woods Cemetery on Eola Road. One of the grave markers from that burial ground can be seen in the museum on 2nd Street. The Volunteer Cemetery Board met faithfully through the years, often meeting in one of the academies or schools located in Warrenville in the mid-19th century. During the Civil War, the number of burials in the cemetery nearly doubled. Warrenville, a town of about 250, had sent 50 men and boys to the war, and a third of them died in combat, prison, or from accidents or disease. In 1885, additional property was purchased for the cemetery grounds from William Manning, often known as the second founder of Warrenville. Today, the cemetery is almost 5 acres and has 2,950 grave sites. About 1,500 are occupied. Local resident John Player, owner of Player Dairy, took a special interest in the cemetery in the 20th century. Mr. Player is responsible for the fence along the front of the cemetery, as well as the columns at the entrances. He also obtained the large planter from the right-of-way of the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin Railway when the train line went out of business in 1957. Current cemetery board member, President William Fessler, procured the flagpole which stands at the back of the cemetery, and flags are provided as needed by the Warrenville VFW post. During our program tonight, you will hear the stories of 7 Warrenville women. As 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. We are continuing to feature the stories of women who have contributed to our community. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoy hearing these stories.
Nancy Morton Warren was born February 9, 1785 in Orange, Massachusetts to Abner Morton and Sophia Goddard Morton. Nancy's father's family emigrated from England in 1623, 3 years after the Mayflower on the Anne. The Mortons and the Goddards were both prominent families in the New England colonies and early United States. After prominent marriages for many of Nancy's siblings, her family was often frustrated that Nancy chose to marry Daniel Warren. Although the Warren family was also a long-standing New England family, Daniel had tried and failed with many business ventures. Despite the family's struggles, Nancy and Daniel created a happy home for their 8 children, 7 girls and 1 boy. Raising the children in the close-knit community of Western New York provided support to Nancy and Daniel, as many neighbors helped to keep an eye on the children. The 7 girls helped Nancy with household chores, while Julius helped his father at the grist mill and later at the distillery he opened. In the early 1830s, as the oldest children began to marry and start families of their own, Nancy's husband Daniel sought a new start in the hopes of bringing prosperity to their family. The Warrens resolved to head to the prairie land of Illinois in 1832. At that time, Nancy, who was at a senior age of 48, was not in good health. Members of her family, the Mortons, asked her to not make the dangerous trip out west. Nancy, however, saw the opportunity the move would give to her children and stood by her husband and resolved to go. After her husband's son and son-in-law headed to set up a new homestead in the spring of 1833 along the DuPage River, Nancy and her 4 youngest daughters left New York in October with a paid wagoneer leading them. As Nancy and the girls headed west, she mourned their eastern home, but also saw the excitement the journey brought to her young daughters. The 3.5-week trip proved to be more difficult than the women had expected, especially for Nancy, whose health was very fragile. Many trails were not well traveled, accommodations were scarce, and the closer they got to their destination, the more Native Americans they encountered. This was troubling to the pioneers due to exaggerated rumors of attacks. When Nancy and her daughters finally reached Chicago, Nancy could finally rest a little easier despite their tired bodies. They were soon reunited with the Warren men along the DuPage River. The next year, 1834, Julius, the only Warren son, moved up the DuPage River a mile from the family's first settlement and built a home which stands on the northwest corner of Main Street and Batavia Road. It is the oldest wood-frame structure in DuPage County. Julius and the Warren family would help grow the settlement and form the foundation of what became the community of Warrenville. Nancy not only watched her son prosper as a stagecoach innkeeper, mill owner, and legislator, but also saw her unmarried daughters find love and marry well, including her youngest daughters, twins Mary and Maria, who married 2 of the richest men in Chicago. Nancy's gamble to support her husband's dream to head west paid off, and the lasting contributions of her family continue to impact us today. Nancy passed away in February of 1873, years after her husband, and was laid to rest next to him in the Warrenville Cemetery, surrounded by the community her family built. Nancy's grave is also near another landmark that owes its founding to her family, the Morton Arboretum, which was founded by her great-nephew. The work of Nancy's children and family resonates throughout northern Illinois as a testament to this great woman, Nancy Morton Warren.
Good evening. I would like to share with you a story of Marion Bird. Marion was born in Winnebago County in Rockton, Illinois on August 15, 1839. Her parents were Louisa Warren Bird and Frederick Bird. Her parents married in New York in 1824, which is where they started their family. They moved to Illinois to be with Marion's mother's family, who were the Warren family, which was led by Louisa's brother, Colonel Julius Warren, who had come to this area in 1833. When Marion's family moved to Illinois, they lived in what is currently the McDowell Woods area. But it wasn't long before they decided to settle upriver in a new developing community, which we know as Warrenville. In 1835, the family's next move relocated them from Warrenville to just north of Geneva, Illinois. Westward movement was in their blood, and the family's next move brought them to the Rock River area. This is where Marion was born, and the family started their farmstead. The Bird family, like the Warren family, were New Yorkers, so during Marion's childhood, there were many trips between New York and Illinois. Sadly, on one of these trips in 1842, Marion's father, Frederick, passed away. Her mother, at the age of 36, was left as a widow with 7 children. Louisa and her children returned to the Warrenville area and built a home on a large estate at 4th and Jackson Streets. Marion spent most of her growing years at this location. It was 3 South, 457 Jackson Street, which is located just west of the current fire department. As the niece of Colonel Warren, Marion and her siblings overheard many discussions concerning the growing Warrenville community and the big decisions that had to be made. She witnessed the community of growth from a mere 20 people to nearly 1,000. In 1860, at her uncle Colonel Warren's home, Marion's sister Frankie married James McKee. The McKee family were also pioneers from this area, and they homesteaded here in 1830s. Marion was very close to her sister Frankie and helped her with her growing family. Sadly, though, in 1899, Frankie passed away. It was common in those days for family members to step up and help other family members. So after Frankie's death, Marion moved in with her brother-in-law on Eola Road and worked as his housekeeper. Marion and her late sister Frankie's husband had always been very close friends and shared many outings together. Unfortunately, one fateful outing took a tragic turn. On Wednesday, December 30th, 1903, Marion and James had chosen to attend a performance of Mr. Bluebird. It was a very popular musical comedy showing at the Iroquois Theater in Chicago to a sold-out crowd. You may be familiar with the Oriental Theater, which stands there now. Well, during the performance, a fire broke out, and Marion and James, along with nearly 600 of the 1,602 attendees, were tragically killed. This became known as the Great Chicago Theater Fire disaster and was described as a national tragedy. In fact, it was the deadliest theater fire and single building fire in the United States history. By comparison, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 resulted in 300 deaths. It was recorded that shortly after the beginning of the second act, 8 men and women were performing in the pale moonlight, with the stage illuminated by blue-tinted spotlights to suggest a night scene. Well, one of the sparks from those spotlights arced and ignited a muslin cloth curtain. A stagehand tried to douse the fire with kill-fire canisters provided, but it quickly spread to the fly gallery high above the stage. There, several thousand feet of highly flammable painted canvas sets and scenery flats were hung. Patrons of all levels began to flee the theater, only to have their attempts hindered. There was a single broad staircase leading from the balcony and the gallery levels to the foyer. Additionally, the theater was designed with only one shared entrance and exit. Those patrons on the upper levels tried to exit via the fire escapes, only to find them unusable and unfinished. The design proved disastrous. The largest death toll was at the base of these stairwells, where hundreds of people were trampled, crushed, and asphyxiated. The Iroquois Theater had no fire alarm box or telephone. This disastrous fire led to quick and radical changes in the theater policies and fire codes that are still in place today. Theaters across the United States and in Europe closed immediately to make needed improvements. The Iroquois fire prompted widespread implementation of the panic bar, added extra signage for emergency lighting, and other fire ordinances and procedures. Marion Bird's body was brought back to our Warrenville Cemetery to be buried next to her mother. Her memory lives on at the Warrenville Historical Museum. Marion chose to honor her family's heritage in a family tree hair sculpture that she designed and created. The intricate hair sculpture, arranged into a beautiful flower cross, was made from pieces of hair from 66 of her family members. The museum is proud to display this treasured piece that not only encompasses Marion's love for her family, but also speaks to the ways historic events have shaped our modern world.
Mary Josephine Polifka Paver was born on April 23, 1879 in Friendship, Wisconsin. Mary was the oldest of 8 children born to Peter Polifka and Mary Yusa. Her father had emigrated to Wisconsin with his brother from Bohemia, what is today the Czech Republic, and worked as a butcher. In Wisconsin, Peter met Mary Yusa in 1878, another immigrant from Bohemia. When Mary was 12, she and her family moved to Lyons in Cook County, Illinois, along with Peter's younger brother, Michael. They lived with the family and helped on the farm. Mary Josephine married Edward Benjamin Paver on December 21, 1898 in Warrenville, when she was 19 years old. Their first son, Charles, was born on January 30th, 1900. Over the next 4 years, they had a daughter, another Mary, Mary Jane, and a son, Edward. 10 years after Edward was born, they were blessed with another child, another son, Howard, known as Howdy, born in 1914. He was born just 7 months after Mary's closest sister, Annie, had passed away. Annie and Mary had married brothers, Annie marrying Floyd Clinton Paver. Both couples started their lives in Warrenville and bringing up their children in the rural community that Warrenville remained until the turn of the 20th century. Tragically, her daughter, Mary Jane, died in 1922 at the age of 19, only 6 months after having given birth to her only son, Robert Swede Rogers. After her daughter's death, Mary and Ed took in their young grandson, Swede, and raised him at their home at 28 West 355 Jackson. In those days, the home was right behind the Baptist Church on Batavia Road. The church burned down in 1935 and has now been replaced by the Warrenville Fire Station. Mary's husband, Edward, died in 1923 at the age of 44 in Warrenville. Mary lived another 20 years, taking in laundry to help pay the bills. After the clothes were cleaned and ironed, little Swede would deliver them back to their customers. Mary died on December 10th, 1943, and was buried here in the Warrenville Cemetery 2 days later. The Paver family stayed in Warrenville, making contributions to the community and helping shape its institution. Charles, Mary's oldest son, became the second fire chief of Warrenville, taking over after John Pettit died in 1946. Mary's second son, Edward, went into business with Leon Schmidt's husband, Al, and the Paver Schmidt Sinclair gas station celebrated its grand opening on March 5th, 1954 on the northwest corner of Butterfield and Batavia. In 1959, Edward's youngest brother, Howdy, took over the business, and the Paver brothers ran the operation for another 15 years. The Paver family lives on today in Warrenville, and my family, the descendants of Mary's grandson, Swede Rogers.
Mary Hospowski Mack was born in Chicago on July 5, 1912, to her parents Thomas and Eleanor Mackey. Her grandparents were Irish immigrants who helped make up the large population of Irish in Chicago. Mary grew up on Glenwood Avenue in the Edgewater neighborhood of Chicago, living with her parents and siblings and her maternal grandmother. Mary's history with Warrenville started when she moved to town from Chicago in the late 1930s to help her sister Tilly Petrusek run the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin ticket agency, which was located in what would become the first City Hall building. The interurban trains that ran through Warrenville started in 1902, and by the time Tilly and Mary took over running the station, the electric train line was very popular. During this time, the ticket office was the hub of Warrenville's activity, with the station being open from 6 in the morning until 9 in the evening, and there was a steady flow of traffic from those traveling into Chicago for work, the Warrenville High School students traveling to Wheaton for school, or other community members heading to surrounding towns for shopping or visits. Tilly and Mary's main responsibility was to keep the station open, warm, and clean. Mary kept all the records and made up the reports on the operation. Tickets, penny candy, ice cream, tobacco products, and newspapers could all be purchased at the station as well. Mary became more entwined with Warrenville's history when a young man from an old pioneer family, as Mary so romantically phrased it, swept her off her feet. Mary was won over by Lloyd Mack, a descendant of the first Edward Packer Mack, for whom Mack Road is named. Lloyd was a Warrenville Cyclones baseball player and was self-employed in his construction company, the L. Mack Builders Company. After their marriage, Mary and Lloyd had a son, Edward Packer Mack IV, in 1942, and 4 years later the couple welcomed a daughter, Ellen. The family lived on North Williams Road in a home that showcased Lloyd's fine carpentry skills. During their marriage, Mary and Lloyd loved to care for their property, growing over 1,000 evergreens from seedlings, and enjoyed traveling and rousing good games of bridge or pinochle. In 1954, Mary became the medical receptionist for Dr. Mary Breen, Warrenville's beloved family doctor. Mary Mack's sweet spirit and ready smile put the patients at ease as they waited in the reception room to see the doctor. Mary also had a community spirit and volunteered and served on many boards. She was a charter member of the Central DuPage Hospital Board, served on the Warrenville Cemetery Board, even leading cemetery tours herself, and was a charter member of the Warrenville Historical Society, serving as its board president for a period of time. Mary also held offices in the Women's Evening Club, the VFW Ladies Auxiliary, the Warrenville Fire Department's Women's Auxiliary, and the school board, of which she also served as president. Mary was always active in the Community Baptist Church in Warrenville. Mary made many contributions to our community. She passed away on January 7, 2001, at St. Patrick's Residence in Naperville. Mary outlived her husband Lloyd by 14 years, and sadly her son by 6 months. Reverend David Anderson officiated her funeral service at the Warrenville Community Baptist Church, and she was laid to rest in the Warrenville Cemetery.
Violet Norcus Fredericks was born on January 12, 1920, in Brooklyn, New York. Violet's father, John Norcus, was the son of immigrants from Lithuania who came to the United States in 1870. Her mother, Lillian Corbett's family, had immigrated from England the generation before in 1852. Both sides of the family had lived in New York City, making their way to the biggest city of their new country. Violet's father worked in a shoe factory in New York and lived on Clarkson Avenue in Brookfield, Brooklyn, New Prospect Park, on the edge of Flatbush. Out of high school, Violet began working as a stenographer. But when World War II broke out, she was moved into service and joined the other women who, after President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Navy Women's Reserve Act into law, joined the part of the WAVE's corporate women accepted for volunteer emergency service. The wartime allowance of women joining the Navy was allowed to free up male personnel for sea duty. Violet joined the war effort on September 21st, 1944, and stationed in Washington, where she met a sailor from Warrenville, James Richard Frederick. Violet and James were married on November 3, 1945, at the Episcopal Chapel in Brooklyn, 2 months after the end of the war. After their marriage, James shipped off to England as part of the Navy's role in handling the aftermath and negotiations taking part in Europe. After her return from overseas, James convinced Violet that they must move to his hometown of Warrenville. James very much felt, as I think most of you would agree, there is no other better place to raise your family and live than Warrenville. Despite having much of the transition in her way of life, Violet enthusiastically embraced her new community. The couple had 6 children: James, Jack, Bob, Jill Ann Palumbo, Carol, and Gerard, who sadly died at birth. While Violet balancing raising her children, she involved herself in Warrenville community. She taught Sunday school and served as a leader in the Catholic Youth Organization and helped with the local Girl Scout troop. One thing her more rural life allowed her, however, was land, and she commented to Mildred Baldwin when interviewing her for the Well-Dressed Women of Warrenville feature in the 1972 Warrenville Digest that what she prized most was her 75 feet of garden. She was very proud to report that she had spaded the entire thing all by herself. She grew strawberries, cherries, big boy tomatoes, and other vegetables and fruits. Being a city person, Violet never learned to drive and therefore set up her own Treasures of Warrenville, creating her explorations right in her own home. She attended every auction, rummage sale, and garage sale to find the perfect pieces to add to her collection. Her very own museum consisted of a steel candy dish from the Chicago World's Fair, a candlewick set of fork, spoon, and dish, many pieces of cut glass, pressed glass, and oddities from all over the world that found a home with Violet. Violet passed away at the age of 76 on March 15, 1996. Her funeral mass was held at St. Irene's Catholic Church in Warrenville, where she had given many years of volunteer service. She was buried in St. Michael's Cemetery in Wheaton.
In 2020, as we highlight women's history, we pay a special tribute to the woman who devoted much of her life to bringing Warrenville history to life. The stories that you have heard tonight and much of the history contained in the Warrenville Historical Museum we owe to Leon Schmidt. Leon was born in 1918 and grew up in Chicago. Although she was a city kid, she fondly remembered spending summers in rural Indiana with her cousins, experiencing the freedoms that life in the open countryside could provide. Leon moved to Warrenville in 1953 and found the benefits of that country living she so loved during her childhood in Indiana, with all the conveniences of the big city just a train ride away. She was immediately interested in our small town and wanted to learn more about Warrenville's history, but she couldn't find much written about it, and what she could find was a lot of conflicting information. Her strong desire to know more about her adopted home was further fueled by the stories of her new husband, Al Schmidt. He had worked in the community for over 20 years by the time of their marriage and had learned a lot about the tight-knit community here. Leon's Gregg Business College education and work as a secretary and editor gave her the necessary skills to start researching and compiling Warrenville history. While she pursued her labor of love gathering our local history, she continued to work as editor of the Signet of the Phi Sigma Kappa, and then joined Al when he opened the car clinic on Batavia Road in 1960. She took on the important responsibilities of receptionist, order writer, cashier, bookkeeper, parts runner, and advertising manager. Leon also took great joy in chauffeuring around the car clinic customers while their cars were being worked on, allowing her to get to know people in town better and keep up on all the local happenings. Leon's hard work and expertise are clearly shown in the 6 local history books she authored, which detail the early days of DuPage County and Warrenville. Not only did she publish Warrenville's history through her almost 50 years of research and writing, she also worked to make sure that the community's rich heritage could be shared and have a home. In the early 1980s, she helped create the Warrenville Historical Society and worked with the city of Warrenville to find a suitable home for Warrenville's own historical museum in the former Albright Art Studio on 2nd Street. Leon's hard work and dedication did not go unnoticed. Throughout her life, she received many accolades and awards. In 1991, the Illinois Historical Society presented her with a Friends of History Award, their highest honor, for sustained and varied contributions to local history. In 1999, she received the Studs Terkel Humanities Service Award Medal from the Illinois Humanities Council. Leon's passion and work live on in the community she loves so much and in her life's work preserved and on display at the Historical Museum. Thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed hearing some of the stories of women who have come into our community and left great impacts. We hope that you and your family are doing well as we continue to work through this pandemic together. We look forward to opening the museum in February 2021, but until then, stay connected. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and make sure to check out our blog at www.warrenvillehistorical.org. You can also always email us with any questions or give us a call if there's something you need. Our email is info@warrenvillehistorical.org, and our phone number is 630-393-4215. Thank you so much for joining us.